I'm Peter Gianetti of Homepage News and the International Housewares Association, and welcome to a special presentation of the IHA Webinar Series. In today's webinar, we'll hear from Dave Bush and Ian Woie of freight and logistics services provider J.B. Hunt Transport. They'll discuss the recent change of the National Motor Freight Classification, NMFC, to a density-based pricing structure for less-than-truckload, LTL, shipments. It could be the most significant LTL change of the past 40 years. Our guest presenters today will examine why carriers made the change and how it will impact home and houseware suppliers and retailers. They'll share examples of products impacted by the change and how companies can prevent increased shipping costs during what is already a challenging period of supply chain disruption. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Dave Bush and Ian Woie of J.B. Hunt. Dave and Ian, welcome.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
Dave Bush here. I am LTL VP of LTL for J.B. Hunt, as Peter mentioned. I've spent 28 years of my career in the transportation, specifically geared around LTL world. The first 18, what I call formative years, were on the asset side of the business, and the past decade or so on the non-asset direct, indirect channel side, where I am today, in various sales, operations, and strategy roles, all centered again around the LTL landscape. Yep.
Appreciate it, Dave. And Peter, thanks so much. And for all of you in attendance, thanks for being here. It's great to be in Dallas here with Dave. I am based in Richmond, Virginia, and spent the first, 5 years or so, similar to Dave's career arc anyway, working for an asset-based LTL provider. Similarly, in subsequent years in the industry, have spent time working for 3PLs and freight brokers, and have joined Dave here on the LTL front to help grow out the LTL offering here at J.B. Hunt. Thanks again, everybody, for being here, and we'll jump in. All right. As Peter alluded to, the topic for today is trying to navigate the significant LTL changes that took place back on July 19th. We have a few items that we'll go over, and ideally want to leave you with some best practices and ways to help avoid some of the pitfalls that could happen if some adjustments aren't made. Dave and I have both share a little bit about our background, and I appreciate that we both have a unique experience working both for LTL asset providers as well as third-party brokerages. I anyway think that gives us a unique perspective in the industry, not just in sales functions, but also in some operational visibility as well. And just real quick here about J.B. Hunt. We're a Fortune 300 company. We have a full service transportation offering, whether it's intermodal, dedicated truckload, brokered shipments, refrigerated flatbed, and LTL as well. Our goal really is to create the most efficient transportation network in North America. That truly is something we attempt to live out, and LTL is a big component of that. So as I mentioned today, really the purpose of doing this webinar and getting everybody together is, quite frankly, just to be very simple. We want to provide information. Hopefully this is educational. Hopefully you learn something, and then just share some of the best practices, experience, and wisdom that Dave and I have gathered throughout our careers, and hopefully leave that with you to continue to make good progress in your own transportation offerings and so forth. So a couple of things that we'll cover is just the overview of what the NMFC is, certainly the impact of July 19th, both how we got here, and then also moving forward. And then just quite frankly, again, why were those changes made with so long of no change or minimal change to the NMFC book? why now, and the significance there, and then the outcomes that are intended from those changes. We'll provide a case study, spotlight some housewares related items to make it unique and specific to everyone here in attendance. And then, we want to leave you with some best practices, with some time at the end, as Peter mentioned, for questions and hopefully some helpful answers on our part. Dave, let me start off and kick it over to you. Give us a background of how we got to the changes that took place on July 19th, and maybe provide some context, some history, and so forth.
Thank you. Yeah, just to talk about where we've come from in the LTL landscape. I want to start at the very beginning. In the NMFTA, the National Motor Freight Transportation Association started in 1956, specifically to represent the interest of the LTL industry, setting classification on products that will potentially move on the various LTL providers' networks. That has evolved since 1956. However, as Ian alluded to earlier, this change that we're talking about on July 19th was the biggest by far shift. I want to call it seismic shift of the book that guidelines those classifications for all the various products that potentially could move on one of those providers. There is roughly 5,000 items that are in the classification guidelines today, and on July 19th, over 40% of them, 2,000 plus, changed. Many of those items were changing from a named classification, a flat, basically, this product equals this class, to one that was categorized by the density of the said product. So with that said, it's also important to understand that the LTL, the evolution originally in rolling out the book in 1956 and subsequent years from there was really focused on four main characteristics to determine class. That's the handling ability of that freight, the liability and value of that freight, as well as the density, but also stowability, a word you may not be familiar with, but that basically represents how does it play with others in the truck, because you're sharing the space on that truck moving down the road. Those four characteristics made up the classifications, and like I said, they evolved over time with feedback from the carriers that were handling that product. Those changes ramped up in the past decade or so. More talk was made of, let's slide the rule book to one more geared around density, because at the end of the day, we need to make sure we're being paid and compensated properly for the space that is consumed on our trucks. No different than when you and I walk into the post office and hand them an envelope or a box to ship. The first thing they do is put it on a scale. It's the same concept within the LTL space, but they didn't have the mechanism to capture the classification via just density alone. Those four characteristics came into play in most cases. July 19th, again, that made the massive change was enacted to move more products to a density scale versus a flat identification of one linear class. So there's a 13 sub density scale that goes along. Whenever you hear the term full density scale tied to LTL, it's 13 subs, and it ranges from class 50 to class 400 based on how much pounds per cubic foot is represented in that freight. The only way to arrive at that PCF, pounds per cubic foot, is to have dimensions and weight of your freight. That obviously falls back on the shipper. Shipper has to identify that on the bill of lading, or they're subject to immediate change. It's a especially post July 19th that has become an immediate red flag. Before that date, again, there's a possibility that the freight would have been classified at a flat class, or it could have went under the radar and been missed through the process. However, with the massive change on 40% of the guidelines being changed to this scale, the heightened awareness is considerable on the LTL carrier front.
It's so one of the changes, or one of the pieces of feedback I hear a lot in my sales role is, we've always shipped this in class 70, or we've always shipped this at class 85. This impacts that philosophy, or that historical understanding, if that's correct.
Absolutely. Again, 40% of the population had their items potentially, and Ian will walk us through an example or two here in a little bit, but they've had their classification that they may have been accustomed to for years, may have not been touched, may have been called a class 85, for instance, for years. Now it's being judged solely on the merit of its density. Forget about the liability, forget about the stowability. The carriers are intent on making sure that they know the space and the density of that product that's moving on their trucks, and they will charge based on that. Every LTL rate, just to go backwards a little bit, every LTL rate that you get is subject to 4 pieces of information: a class, the weight of that order, and the origin and the destination zip code. So that one of those 4 elements being in flux can mean volatility on pricing, especially when you don't do the due diligence to clearly articulate what the dimensions are accurately on the bill of lading.
Exactly. Good point. Yep.
Why did these carriers make the change? Again, we talked about it a little bit, but it was to be very clear on how to get to freight class. Again, I don't know that everybody really understood the concept of stowability before we talked about it today, but that was, up until this point, was something that they used in 40% of the book. So this is made from a simplicity perspective to be very cut and dry. These are the dimensions. This is the weight. This is your pounds per cubic foot. And you have a sliding scale based on whatever that result is to tell you what the class is. And we will be compensated based on that classification. Being sold as simplification, which in a lot of ways it is, but also, to be very transparent, it's to close gaps in missed or lost revenue. Because when a shipper misstates that or doesn't state that, I think more often than not, and I see plenty of bill of ladings today that do not have dimensions on those bill of ladings. That is opening up the carrier to not charging properly for the space that freight takes up, and moving down to its destination.
So is there a way to determine if this is going to be a positive change, meaning rates are going down for shippers, or rates are going up?
So the 13 sub scale is an expansion of, there were density items prior to July 19th for various products. Rubber, plastic come to mind. That said, there was an 11 sub scale that went down as low as class 60. The carriers have introduced 2 new tiers, class 55 and class 50. Lower class equals lower rate. Those are for the benefit of freight that moves at a PCF of 35 pounds per cubic foot or more. So if you've been shipping at a class 85, for instance, in a named item type of scenario, and your product is extremely dense, 35 pounds per cubic foot is dense freight. If you're one of those folks, you could be in line for some savings, because we would be taking advantage of the new 13 layered sub density scale. However, if we're operating in a single flat classed environment, and now you're in a scaled environment, you are very well subject to paying more for your freight charges. And again, Ian will walk through a couple, I think, relevant examples for all.
Yep, exactly. Have a couple of items in mind to be able to highlight. First and foremost, though, just kind of wanted to offer a kind of before and after scenario here. So this is a screenshot from the NMFC book before July 19th, before the changes were implemented, and just want to point your attention to a couple of things. First and foremost, each individual item here under the household utensils group has its own item number. So when completing the BOL and asking for an NMFC, think like coffee makers, for example, are going to be 100690. The freight class is 175. No matter how much it weighs, no matter how big the pallet is, it's a direct freight class tied to a product. So coffee makers, coffee pots, regardless if it's made of cinder blocks or feathers. I'm being a little bit facetious there, so bear with me. But I'll highlight that in a second. There are two products here that I do want to draw particular attention to highlight some of the differences, both positive and negative, regarding the bottom line for shippers. One is, looks like the third item down, dusters. So say, for example, you ship dusters, and when you're already used to calculating density to a degree, because that has to determine freight class, even in the before July 19th environment. So say, for example, that when calculating your density, you got to calculation of 8 pounds per cubic foot. So that's sub 2, drawing my eyes over to the right, class 100. So let's look at a post July 19th comparison there for dusters. Here you'll notice on the left, there is one item number for all of the household utensils group, not the multiples like we saw on the previous screen. Likewise, too, there's no freight class tied to each one of those items. It's all density based. So in our example, the pounds per cubic foot being 8. Previously, as we saw, that was being shipped at a class 100. Now, if we look at, sub 8, if we say it was a pounds per cubic foot of 12, that would give us a sub 8, and that now is being shipped at a class 85. So in this scenario, shipping dusters, if your pounds per cubic foot doing the calculation is at 12, your freight class at 85 is going to equate to a lower shipping rate. Conversely, let's look at another example here. Drawing your eye further down, maybe 3/4 of the way down the screen for mills, 101160. That was always shipped at a class 85, same kind of calculation like I highlighted with coffee makers. If you're shipping some kind of pepper mill, rice mill, it's going to be a class 85. Post July 19th, if the density is less than 12 of any kind, could be 10, could be 4, could be 11.9, the transportation costs are going to be more expensive because there's going to be a higher freight class. So just wanted to highlight those direct examples there of, again, it's a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of there are going to be some products that are going to ship at probably a lower freight rate than before July 19th. And then there are going to be some products as well that ship at a higher freight rate. It just depends on the density. All right, so best practices here, as well as maybe some operational adjustments to put into play. First of all, just how do we calculate density? For those that like the longhand version, as opposed to the numerous density calculators that exist out there, doing a quick Google search, density is very simply weight divided by cubic feet. And so those calculations are there for you. As someone who has spent more than a decade in the LTL industry, I have a strong opinion that everything should be documented regardless, if it's pertaining to density-based rate class, like we're talking now, or even thinking of claims. I think it's very wise to have a before documentation of the product before it is picked up. So that if anything changes in transit, it's received, the condition, the size, the pallets are leaning to a degree. That's documented. There is a defined before and after visual of your shipments. So first and foremost, take pictures, include all the dimensions, include the weight, include everything. But I would highly recommend taking pictures of your freight before it leaves the dock and before it is picked up. Likewise, too, keep a product book, a spec book that shows, hey, when we package our coffee makers, they are in boxes that are, I'm going to make up some numbers. Let's say like 24 inches by 20 by 20 inches tall. And on the pallet, then there are 16 of these boxes included in this shipment. Keep a product book that shows how those coffee makers are packaged, how many can fit on a pallet, which of course can vary depending upon order size and so forth. But keep that updated as well, so that if packaging changes, if products change, SKUs change, those are continued to be reviewed and evaluated on a regular basis. In the same way, we can update our internal product books. Whatever technology is used to help improve efficiency in your own transportation setup, whether it be a TMS, WMS, ERP system, keep that updated as well with these new changes reflected after July 19th. And if you're using, another party, another group to help with that, ask those questions of them. How have they updated their technology as well? One tool that I've come to rely on throughout my career, and I know Dave has as well, is ClassIT, or ClassIT. That has been updated to now reflect basically a Google search type of environment for NMFC items. If there's ever any question about what your NMFC is for a particular product, ClassIT is a great resource. Quick plug there. Sorry to get a little bit salesy here on us. ClassIT Plus does have a subscription, whereas we offer that for free here at JB Hunt. Do you want to note, though, that accessorials still apply? So again, we talked about stowability. We talked about how freight is, commingles on the trailer with other freight. How well does it get along with other pallets that are on the trailer of an LTL truck? I'm thinking here specifically of over-dimensional shipments. So even though we're transitioning to a density-based class system, a density-based pricing system, if it's something that's over 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, that over-dimensional accessorial is still in play. Likewise, too, calculate the density for each pallet that's being moved. Just because one pallet may have a density of, let's say, 10, the next one may be 9, the next one may be 12. Document each one of those and include each one on the BOL as a separate line item. There's no sense in overpaying for your shipment if there are differing densities that then equate to different freight classes. Likewise, too, that is something that carriers will look at is if all the pallets are not the same size, they will calculate density themselves and they will apply freight charges based on the freight class that comes from those densities too. So just a word to the wise there. Last two things real quick, have an advocate in the industry. Whether it is a subject matter expert or someone that you trust, at a carrier or at a broker, have somebody that's going to be able to do an audit, be able to understand your shipments, understand the the nuances that make each one of your companies unique, and rely on them and communicate, ask questions. This is a big change, as Dave outlined. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. There's going to be, again, some questions that will need to be answered. Some things will evolve. So I just highly encourage everybody to have an advocate within the industry that's going to be there and help out. Last thing I want to point out too, and Peter mentioned this at the outset here at the intro, is we have some resources I'd like to share. We'll include those when the presentation gets distributed and sent out here at the end of the week. But please ask questions. David and I, of course, are here to help and are available at any point. We're excited about continuing to grow the J.B. Hunt offering in the LTL space, and hopefully some of the information that we shared here today can be helpful for continuing to improve upon the transportation process for each one of your companies there too. Dave, have I missed anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think that really good job in best practices. I think the timing is such with this change, only a few weeks in the works. Some of you that are out listening today may have seen some invoices roll in that have already changed and you didn't understand exactly why. I don't have a tremendous amount of confidence in the invoicing party giving you a lot of background on that change, other than that it is a change. Key to keep in mind with this massive shift, the LTL carriers, underlying LTL carriers that are moving the freight, have updated their systems. So before July 19th, on some of these items and items that were already density based, the one that Ian showed at the beginning that was a 3 sub density item. There are people, their job is on the freight dock to inspect freight and potentially change it based on, okay, that's the wrong density for that. We just weighed it. We just measured it. We're going to charge the customer more. It's called a weight and research or a weight and inspection charge. You may have already seen that, been accustomed to that. That was pre-July 19th. And while that still will be happening in the background, it's being supplemented by now systems on the front end. The billing systems of these carriers and brokers are being updated to reflect the new density-based rules around 40% of the guidebook. So just, again, I know Ian mentioned it, having an advocate, ask the questions, it's key, but very, very possible that you may have already seen some of this impact in the few weeks that have transpired since this change went into effect on the 19th.
And at the end of the day as well, putting ourselves in your shoes, I can't imagine a more frustrating situation to receive an invoice that does not match the original quote. That's something that, it should be the goal of every shipment, is that when the invoice is received, it matches the anticipated cost. Certainly that puts shippers at a disadvantage of potentially having to absorb or eat cost if the rate is increased. Whereas if it was calculated and all of the rules, the nuances were understood beforehand, be able to charge the customer the appropriate amount rather than the anticipated. So I think, as we're going through all of these changes, and sharing all this information, that's probably the number one motive or goal that I have anyway, and just being able to share all this information. And I think, Dave, you would agree, is just how do we continue to equip shippers with the right information so that when the invoice is received, it matches the quote, and apples to apples versus.
Because this will not be the last evolution. The guidebook will continue to change more to density-based rating for the items that remain behind after July 19th.
Yep.
So it's an ongoing education process that's tied to this.
Exactly. Yep. Great point. That concludes all of the info that we have. Again, if Dave and I can help in any way, shape, or form, we are more than happy to do so. Our contact info is there. And likewise, Peter and everybody at the IHA have ways to get in touch with us as well. Thank you, everybody, for allowing us this time to share this info. We hope it's been valuable. We hope it's been useful. And right, if there's anything that we can continue to do to assist, we're happy to do so. If there are any questions, Dave and I are here to answer and provide any more information and context beyond what we've shared. Thank you.
Thank you very
Dave.
much, everyone.
Thanks, Dave. Let's leave that screen up with the contact information as we go through a few questions here. I know I have a couple questions, and we'll give some time for the folks in attendance to add. I guess my first question is, we're almost a month into this right now. Dave, you kind of alluded to the fact that people might be being surprised with some of their invoicing, but how's it going? I mean, what's been the kind of beta version of this rollout right now? Is it creating more questions and answers, or is it going pretty smoothly right now?
No, it's creating a lot of questions. I will say one interesting note already from the carrier side of things is soon after July 19th, the largest LTL carrier in the nation, FedEx Freight, decided to postpone the application of these changes. The only one to publicly come out and say that. An opportunity. The same feelings that I had at the shipping community was not necessarily ready. There was conversations that have been going on all year about this in the carrier customer relationship landscape. That's not disputable. However, it's not just about having the conversation. It's about is the shipper going to ensure that dimensions are on their bill of lading, that they understand the actual impact that this could very well affect their bottom line. Doing that for all the possible customers in this country on a given day, impossible. And any carrier that said otherwise, I think was a little bit in la la land. But FedEx did and took that step because of that, and they're delaying it for a couple months. However, that to me it's gray, and when there's gray, there's questions, there's opportunity, but there's a lot of questions. There's confusion, consternation, what have you. But at the end of the day, it's affecting bottom lines.
Right. I don't even think it was, I think it was within 48 hours that FedEx made that call. What was interesting as well is the July 19th implementation date was on a Saturday. LTL doesn't pick up on Saturdays. So interesting timing there. And then by Monday morning, there was that press release that we read that FedEx had delayed their implementation of these rules until the end of the year.
So there's nothing that requires a carrier to follow the rules. These are guidelines, these are standards, but they are each to their own in terms of how to implement at this point?
No, I mean, yes, officially, but that's not how it works. I mean, they're the only ones that are operating in that island right now, and they've only postponed it, I believe, for 3 months.
Okay.
Other folks,
I expect others to follow. I'm just curious.
We haven't heard anything since, and it's been multiple weeks. The carrier, they got a thing to keep very closely in mind is it was the carrier community that pushed for this.
Yeah.
It wasn't the customer community, that's for sure. So the carrier community pushed for this. They wanted this for a long time. They got some of it, 40%. It's been over a decade that I've been hearing while I've been on the brokerage side of the fence, I've been hearing the carrier community tell me we're going to go to density-based pricing. We're going to go to density-based pricing for everything. They didn't get that completely, but they're more than half of the way there with this change added on to the prior density-based rules.
Yep.
So it's not going backwards. I think it was just more, I think FedEx either opportunistic slash sensing that same confusion and problem brewing for people that weren't prepared to make this change. There's a lot of legacy shipping that has been going on, and the behaviors have been a certain way. Breaking those habits can be hard.
It strikes me that these types of decisions have been sort of siloed, especially in larger companies, and other parts of the organization aren't always aware of what the shipping rules are going to be. But it sounds to me like as an industry, with all of the supply chain disruption of the past 5 years, whether it was the post-COVID issues or what we've been dealing with tariffs and all of that, organizations are becoming more kind of horizontal, if you will, in terms of understanding how one aspect affects the others. Do you see this issue now permeating organizational strategy, or should it be permeating organizational strategy? And by that, are we going to see significant packaging changes? Are we going to see a move to materials that are, from a density basis, maybe going to be a little bit less expensive than the original? I mean, does this have ramifications well beyond just what the invoice is right now?
Yes. And you mentioned a very key one in my mind is around packaging. I still to this day use a large consumer of transportation daily in my daily life, and I still receive boxes that are not full. A lot of air being shipped on that. When that ends up affecting the bottom line in a direct way, you start seeing change.
Yep.
And I definitely see that affecting how people look at their buying decisions around how they even package their goods that ship out.
I think too, Peter, just one point to mention, and we can go down another rabbit hole and maybe worth another conversation at another point, but consumer behavior obviously has changed significantly over the last several years with the growth in e-commerce, shipping directly to homes and so forth. And that's fallen in large part on LTL carriers. So they're looking at this as a way to further define what an LTL shipment could or should look like as one category. And then if it falls outside of that scope or that window, it's going to be priced differently and so forth. So I understand, and I want to be very clear here that I don't, and we don't need to come off as being overly critical of carriers, but it's certainly an operational adjustment that probably for their benefit needed to be made. But then likewise too, it's something that we as consumers, we as shippers need to be cognizant of and just make the adjustment. So change can be difficult. Change can be a process, especially as in the past several decades. The example that we alluded to of customers that have always shipped something at a class 65. It's like, oh, we've always done this. We've done this for decades. Yada yada. To change that all of a sudden, in some ways, approach this through the lens of, oh, now we're going to enforce the rules after we change them. It's just a lot to adjust to all at once.
There's a couple questions in here. Let's get to them. Someone's asking, what happens if the dimensions and weights are not on the bill of lading?
So, again, the carriers that are moving this freight now have updated their systems, minus FedEx for a short period of time, have updated their systems to reflect these new guidelines. So that would be an immediate red flag that would get the attention of the carrier to be adjusted without any notice. There's not a communication mechanism outside of the updated invoice that comes. So you may have quoted and got X. The invoice that comes, trails it a few days or weeks, is going to come back differently based around those guidelines.
I think too, it opens shippers up to the whatever rules and imagination the carriers would like to use with regard to how they're going to calculate that. So I know in previous years there were some carriers that if there were not weights and dimensions on the BOL, specifically even dimensions, it was an automatic like 150 or 175 freight classification, regardless of what the product was and so forth. So that was employed as a way to, as a catch-all of if there's missing information, it's going to be grouped together at a 150 or 175. So right, I think it's to the shipper's benefit to have that information included and documented, and again, just a way to provide that evidence, if you will, if there is a reclass or a reweigh associated with that shipment.
Other than a change in the invoice, are there other penalties to be incurred if compliance isn't if compliance isn't followed here, or is it just simply you're going to end up paying the difference?
There is the potential for some accessorials tied to those changes as well. That's going to be individual carrier-based decision on how much enforcement there'll be on that. Yep. Again, thinking back to pre-July 19th, there's individuals throughout an LTL carrier's dock environment that were full-time employees dedicated to checking, inspecting what they expect from the shippers, because there was no way to verify when you pick up from the shipper's dock exactly how much does that shipment weigh and what are the dimensions without getting out a tape measure and having a scale. So that those things happen when it gets back to the origin depot. Individuals checking on that, again, humans, and they're catching as much as they possibly can. Whereas post July 19th, you're now involving software to be updated to catch that as well, where you're not relying just on those individuals inspecting, if you will.
Most carriers at their docks, at the terminals, will use these fun machines called dimensionalizers, and it is really a large scale that the pallets get placed onto with laser measurements to determine the length, the width, and the height of the shipment. And then that spits out the density, gets reported back, and any variance between the calculated NMFC and freight class then gets reported and adjusted. So just some insight too in terms of being able to identify what equipment some of the carriers are using is they have these dimensionalizer machines that are automating those calculations. It's not a series of people with tape measures and so forth out there and writing things down. It's all automated that way.
Got it. So we have a few more questions we'll try to get to. So the question is, so the NMFC item codes, this is a question, are no longer required. Is that correct? If so, why would a manual calculation not match what the carrier system generated for cubes, resulting in a higher classification?
Yes, so good question. And if I particularly gave the impression that NMFCs are no longer required, I apologize. That was not the intended messaging that I had. So it really is just a simplification. So using that utensils group that I highlighted, that I can even go back to it here. So on the left, the item number under that item column, that's the NMFC. And then, going back to the dusters example, if you had an NMFC that was calculated to be at 12 pounds per cubic foot, it would be listed as 100840-03 to show the subgrouping under that NMFC item number. In the current environment, any item listed under this group, and just using this one here as an example, it's all going to be 101025. The sub calculation, though,
Depends on it.
will depend on the density of the pallet.
Using that sliding scale.
Using the sliding scale to the right, exactly. Yeah, thank you. So my apologies if for the miscommunication, but NMFCs are going to be not just required, but the determining factor in freight class, and then also in the rate that is applied to the shipment.
Yep.
Yeah, right. In terms of the manual versus the automated carrier system, one example that I can think of, and probably the most prevalent, really is, as shipments are loaded onto trailers, offloaded at the different LTL hubs and so forth. Things sometimes can get shifted around. So if your product, as it leaves the dock, is neatly stacked on a standard 48 by 40 inch pallet, and everything is contained within that pallet, sometimes things can slide or things can move. And if there's anything that overhangs even on one edge, even by 1 inch, that calculation is going to be different according to the carrier. Likewise, too, just as I'm thinking out loud, one thing that I didn't make note of, but something that should be communicated, is that when calculating dimensions, it is the footprint of the largest dimensions on any of the sides. So, say for example, you're just shipping one box that is 24 by 24 by 24 inch cube box, but it's on a 48 by 40 inch pallet. The footprint of that pallet is going to be 48 by 40, not 24 by 24. Hopefully that makes sense. So just wanted to highlight that as well. But it can get a little nitpicky. I'll share that again, just from my experience of being on docks with shippers and so forth, and share all of this, not to cause anxiety or anything like that, but just to, again, continue to inform in terms of maybe some things to expect and best navigate.
And it all plays into how we talked about that stowability word, how the freight plays with others. If you have an 8-foot skid, it's 96 inches, and the impact of it being 96 inches versus really having 3 inches of overhang and pushing 100 can mean that getting onto the truck and fitting on the truck properly especially without it being damaged.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, it can, to Ian's point, can come across as being nitpicky in some cases, but it is done with a reason behind it. And it's freight Jenga, if you will, as they're loading these trucks, the ability to play with others and not damage freight down as it rides down the road, because you're sharing space with people with multiple commodities, shapes and sizes. It does play a factor.
Well, all I know is I'm always the guy that makes the Jenga tower fall. So let's hope it's a little better than that. I think Ian, Dave, you might have addressed sort of the next question, but just for clarification, how do you handle what's the recommendation for a quote unquote mixed pallet? One of our attendees says their loads are never the same. They may contain various numbers of bottles, cooking oils, vinegar, depending on what their retailers need as inventory.
Well, I have good news for you. Your life probably just got a lot easier. Rather than calculating or determining the freight class, and then I guess, so let me back up. I guess before July 19th, the proper method was to calculate the freight class of each one of the items, and whichever was the highest freight class. So you had some products that were 85, some that were 125, and some that were 250. Well, the unfortunate scenario there is that all of the pallet would have to ship at class 250. Post July 19th, and in the current environment, it's much easier. It's just a simple length, width, height calculation. The weight density is determined. match up the density to the sub, like in that slide that we've had up. And it's going to be the same, just based on however large, how much space is occupied in the trailer and how much it weighs.
It's straightforward, at least.
Much more straightforward, much easier, much more simple. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
it's
is one big win for those that ship multiple items on a single pallet.
It does strike me that outside of the potential surprises in terms of a higher invoice, depending on which kind of product category you have, this move tends to simplify the process. And when it's implemented and when people are used to it, it will probably streamline a lot of their operations with regard to shipping and making sure that everything on that bill lines up.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah, Peter, that's a very astute observation, and I completely agree. I think in the long run, it will prove to simplify the process. Between here and there, though, that's where it might be a little bit bumpy, and where it'll just take some time to understand how LTL is moved in this new environment that we now live in.
Yeah, I think the issue is companies of all, I mentioned this earlier, companies of all scope, all size, no matter the product category, probably now need to be more vested in understanding all of these rules than they ever have been. Some things become process and they're not taken for granted so much, but they become routine. Well, the routine has been broken, and this is an industry whose routine has been broken on great scale for many reasons. And something like this sort of kind of flew under the radar a little bit and surprised not just, I'm sure, home and houseware suppliers, but many industries right now. And one of our goals at IHA is to, while we're dealing with some of those pressing issues, is to make sure our members of the industry is informed about all of the situations that are arising. And this is why we're bringing Ian and Dave to you today. I recommend you reach out to them directly if you have any more questions. A reminder, we will be sending out a video recording of today's webinar to all attendees, and we will include contact information and some documents from JB Hunt to help you get started and maybe answering some of those questions. I want to thank Ian Woie and Dave Bush from JB Hunt for joining us today and providing us an overview of the LTL changes. I hope our attendees took something home from this that they can now apply to their strategy going forward. On behalf of all of our attendees today and the team at IHA, I want to thank all of you for being here. And unless Dave and Ian, you have anything else to add, we're just going to say thanks, and we will see you all down the road. I'm Peter Gianetti for Homepage News and the International Housewares Association. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.